We're going to continue in our study of Zechariah. We are starting in chapter 9. We're going to go through there. And a lot of this is a prophetic statement, which is something that is a little different than what we've been looking at. He's had visions and thus saith the Lord. But here he's speaking prophecy. And so he has this burden of prophecy, as some of the other prophets use that terminology, this burden that's weighing him down that has to come out. And that's as we look through the last half of this book, that's what we're going to be looking at all the way through chapter 14. There's two major prophecies that are being spoken. We're going to break them into pieces to make them a little more digestible for us. But that's kind of the idea. So we're going to go through 9, 10, and 11. And that's going to be one prophecy, and then 12, 13, 14, then would be the last prophecy. One reason that I wanted to really do a series through the book of Zechariah is that as we get into those last three chapters, it deals a lot with the second coming of Christ. Now here in all of these, we've been looking at, we're seeing the near and far in a lot of what he's talking about here. There's a near fulfillment of the word of the prophet that speaks to the people of that day, but there's also a shadow of what's to come. So I've seen it sometimes you see in different commentaries or books talking about biblical prophecy is like two hills. And so the one that's close to you is kind of low, but the one in the distance higher. And you don't see how big the valley is between the two, but you can see from peak to peak. And that's kind of the whole idea of the prophecy. There may be a long period of time between the two, but you can see that there's going to be, this is happening here, and then pretty soon that's going to be happening out there. We don't know exactly when, but we do know that according to the Word of God that is coming. So that's going to kind of get us in the mindset of what we're going to be looking at here. A lot of what we're going to be seeing as we look in this part has been fulfilled already in the expansion of Alexander the Great's empire. So I just want to kind of keep that in mind. We're going to be looking a lot of historical context as we go into this. Verse 1 simply starts out a prophecy. The word of the Lord is against the land of Hadrach and will come to rest on Damascus, for the eyes of all people and all the tribes of Israel are on the Lord. And on Hamath too, which borders on it, and with Tyre and Sidon, though they are very skillful. Now, just not too long here, just an idea. The eyes of all people are on the tribes of Israel and on the Lord. Whenever you look at the history that we've been going through, and you look at that everything that's happened since they had the divided kingdom, the battles they've had with the Egyptians back and forth, the Assyrians coming in and carrying away the northern kingdom of Israel and just taking it away into captivity, leaving only Benjamin and Judah in the land. Then Nebuchadnezzar coming in and conquering Judah and then carrying them away into captivity. So when another invading army starts coming in from the north, don't you imagine they're probably paying attention to that? I'm going to say yeah, whenever they start hearing that there's another army coming in. So yeah, all eyes are turned of all the people, of all the tribes of Israel are on the Lord. They're looking to God right now. Here comes another army. What have we done? Lord, help us. Right? Would you not be in the same position? Well, given their history and everything that they've been through. Whenever you have something going on in your life, are you not the same way? Whenever you think, okay, I'm finally through this, and then you start seeing the warning signs that had come before. You think, wait a minute, what's going on? Is this coming again? I can't handle one more time. Lord, please don't put me through that again. I've had times like that in my life where it seemed like just one wave after another keeps crashing and knocking you down. That's what Israel was feeling like right there. So yes, by all means, all eyes are on the Lord. And on Hamath too, which borders on it, on Tyre and Sidon, and they are very skillful. Tyre has built herself a stronghold. She has heaped up silver like dust and gold like the dirt of the streets. Now, Tyre's an interesting city. There was the Assyrians tried for 5 years to conquer the city, but it was too well fortified. They couldn't get it done. Nebuchadnezzar came in whenever he was coming in to attack Judah. He attacked here, and he laid siege to the city for 13 years. 13 years. They encamped around the city and fought trying to conquer that city. But it's right there on the coast, so they were still able to get the ships. They're Phoenicians, so they were renowned for their shipbuilding, and they were able to get supplies in and out of the city, and they didn't succumb to Nebuchadnezzar. When it looked like he was getting close, you know what they did? This is pretty slick. There was an island, some estimates I've read were a mile to a mile and a half off the coast. They took all the people and moved them to the island. And they built fortifications on the island. So when Nebuchadnezzar finally broke into the city, there was no one there to conquer. They'd all moved out. So he wrecked the city and then went on and did whatever else it was he was going to do. So this is where we have Alexander the Great coming down. He's coming down, he's marching down the coast, and that's what we're looking at here. As he's marching down the coast, he comes to these cities, and he's offering them a chance to surrender. If they won't surrender, then he will conquer them. And if he conquers them, they're going to be treated very badly. Because ideally, he wants them to just give in and surrender and become part of his kingdom. He would rather do it without fighting, but if they want to fight, he's willing to give them the fight that they're looking for. So Tyre is setting off the coast now on this island with walls estimated to be 150 foot high on this island. There was no way to get to it. But Alexander was called the Great for a reason, because he conquered that city in 7 months. And what he did was he took all the rubble from the old city and started throwing it in the sea and made himself a road out to the island. And so, thinking outside of the box a little bit, he was able to go and conquer them. Now, I'm going to give you just a little bit of a foreshadow here. As he was in the process of destroying this city, they laid siege to it. They got the causeway made all the way out there to the island. They were taking troops out there. The fighting was going on. He sends word to Jerusalem. And he asked Jerusalem to send him aid in the form of food and supplies and soldiers. And Jerusalem refuses. Now, I've already said that he's pretty vindictive about such things. So he vows that as soon as he's done here with what he's doing on the coast, then he's going to go to Jerusalem and he's going to teach them a lesson they will never forget. Okay? Now, I get a lot of this is an excerpt from the writings of Josephus. This is extra biblical material, but it is historical, and most people lean towards it. Although some say that it could be dramatized, I think it's worth hearing as we get into this part of it. But now let's go on back to the biblical stuff here. Tyre has built for herself, this is verse 3, a stronghold, which we just talked about. She's heaped up silver like dust and gold like the dirt of the streets. But the Lord will take away her possessions and destroy her power on the sea, and she will be consumed by fire. All of this Alexander the Great does. This was prophesied by Ezekiel whenever he was in captivity in Babylon decades earlier, whenever he said in Ezekiel 26:12, they will plunder your wealth and loot your merchandise. They will break down your walls and demolish your fine houses. This is a prophecy against Tyre in particular. And throw your stones, timber, and rubble into the sea. Everything that has been said, everything that has been prophesied was coming to pass because of the work that Alexander the Great was doing in that area. Now, their impregnable city was going to be completely destroyed. 7 months, it was conquered, it was over. All of their hopes and dreams that they had placed in their fortifications and in their wealth and their seafaring ability was wiped out. So, I come to the place where I say, this could be a good lesson for us. How? I don't live on an island. No, but sometimes we put our hope in the wrong things. See, Tyre was very close to Jerusalem and was right on the edge of the nation of Israel. But consistently, it rejected any influence that they had from Israel to turn to God. And they knew at that time, they had seen the things that God had done. They had seen how God had treated Israel, but they had also seen how Israel was going to come back. They watched this whole process. Zechariah is prophesying the future here. Okay? We're looking at it as the past. Zechariah is prophesying the future. He's prophesying about 200 years before this happened. We're looking back 2,300 years in the past to say that it actually did. So 200 years before these events took place, Zechariah was prophesying everything that was going to happen. He didn't call Alexander by name, but he said exactly what was going to happen to the cities and how it was going to happen. And you go through the other prophets, and they had the same thing, and it all comes together and shows exactly what Alexander was doing to them, the cities, as he conquered them. So, we have to be careful about where we put our hope. We have to be careful where our trust is. Is your trust in your bank account? Is your trust in your friends? Is your trust in the country that we live in? Is your trust in America? Anybody in here have your trust in America? I mean, we live here, so to a certain extent we have to, right? But the truth of the matter is America can fall. And the only thing that will stand is God. And the only way that we can stand is being in God. And we do that with our relationship with Jesus. By having that relationship with Jesus, you have a strong tower in which to run. Does that mean you're never going to face troubles, or if America did fall for some reason, that you wouldn't have trouble? You would absolutely have trouble. There would be trials, but God's hand would be upon you, and he would guide you. He will lead you. That's what they needed to understand. That's what Israel needs to understand. And they're going to learn this lesson very well here in just a little bit as we go on. Don't trust the wrong things. Goes on in 5. Ashkelon will see it in fear. They'll see everything that's happening. Gaza will writhe in agony, and Ekron too, for her hope will wither. Gaza will lose her king, and Ashkelon will be deserted. A mongrel people will occupy Ashdod, and I will put an end to the pride of the Philistines. All of this is coming to pass. And all of this Alexander did. After he got done with Tyre, he came right down the coast. He hit all the cities of the Philistines, and he took every one of them out. The ones that gave him the most trouble, he treated really bad, and was promising still yet to do worse to Jerusalem whenever he got there. But it was all set to happen in a certain way, because God had a plan in all of this. Now, in verse 7, I will take the blood from their mouths, talking about the Philistines, the forbidden food from between their teeth. Those who are left will belong to our God and become a clan in Judah, and Ekron will be like the Jebusites. Now, all of what he's getting here to say is that the blood from their mouths, the forbidden food from their teeth, it was the sacrifices that they made to their idols. That was the way that they did that, and they consumed the blood of those sacrifices, and God specifically forbids such a thing. So he's saying, I am going to remove that, and I am going to do it in such a way that they will no longer have that available to them. And then when he says they'll be like the Jebusites, you guys remember what happened to the Jebusites? Whenever David came through and he conquered them, they just rolled right in and became Jewish people and became part of the nation of Israel. So the people of Ekron, these other people, the ones that are left, are actually just going to roll right in and become just like the Jewish people. They're going to convert. They're going to be part of them. They're just going to be absorbed into that. So he says, this is the things that you can look forward to. Now remember, Zechariah's prophesying. They still yet haven't quite finished the temple, or maybe by then. Some people say that this was in Zechariah's old age, that he had these prophecies here. So the temple might have been completed, but we know that it was still going to be decades before the wall around Jerusalem was done. They still didn't have a large population. The other cities around them wasn't populated. And so here we have this idea of he's seeing all these things in the far future, and how all this is going to come in, and they're going to roll right into the people of God. Now, verse 8, and I hung up on verse 8 for a long time, trying to figure this out. So I'm going to share with you guys my struggle. Verse 8, but I will encamp. Now this is the Lord speaking through the prophet. I will encamp at my temple to guard it against marauding forces. Never again will an oppressor overrun my people, for now I am keeping watch. I really struggled with the never again will an oppressor overrun my people. Because, well, what about Rome, right? Rome is a big one. 70 AD, they completely destroyed Jerusalem, the temple. It was all wrecked. So we know that they did come in, they did oppress the people, they did eventually overrun it. And so as I struggled with this, I kept trying to say, well, maybe this is a look into the future. This is talking about the second coming. This is talking about that. And then I found another version of this, because I kept comparing the versions that I had. But in the New American Standard Bible, it says it this way: no oppressor will pass over them anymore. Now, that can be taken the same way that you would ordinarily read, never again will oppressor overrun my people. But where he says no oppressor will pass over them anymore, that could have a different meaning. And going in context and seeing what happened historically, I really think the NASB has the proper translation here, because when it says that you won't be overrun anymore, the idea of Passover works a whole lot better. Because what we're going to see is that despite the vow that Alexander made, the armies of Greece just go right on past Jerusalem. They just pass right by them. But later on, you have still, it becomes part of the Greek Empire. You still have the Seleucids that came in and took over after Alexander's death, and they oppress and do all kinds of bad things, which I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. But that happens, so there is some Greek oppression, and then they turn to the Romans for help, and then the Romans come in, there's Roman oppression until there's absolute destruction. So you have this. So the whole idea here, I think, fits the context, is this: that no oppressor, never again will there be an army that just walks by. They're doing this because I'm guarding this. But after this, that's not going to be the case. Never again will an army walk past you the way that this is going to happen right here. So you can see this is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Now, I wanted to get into a little bit of Josephus' account of what happened with Alexander and why he left Jerusalem alone. Okay, so he asked for help, and the high priest was in charge. They didn't have a king at that time still, and the high priest was in charge. So they took the letter to the high priest. The high priest read the letter, and guess what? He's threatening, he's going to go, he's going to try to fight Darius, the king of the Medes and Persians, and he's got all these plans. Well, we've covered this. The Medes and the Persians have been good to the Jewish people. They've paid to have the temple rebuilt. They helped pay to keep the walls rebuilt. They protected them whenever they needed it from the people that were around them that wanted to destroy them. So they had a good relationship there. So the high priest was not going to rebel against them for this Greek that was wandering through. Well, he gets done conquering all the cities on the coast, and he starts marching towards Jerusalem. Well, the high priest is beginning to sweat bullets at this time, because he knows what's coming for him whenever Alexander gets there. So he goes in and he has the entire city get together, and they make sacrifices and begin to pray to God. And in a vision in the night, God comes to him and tells him to put on his priestly attire, get all the priests arranged in all of their attire according to their jobs and all the things that they had to do, have the people dressed in white, deck the city out, and prepare to receive Alexander into the city, open the gates wide, and welcome him. So he gets up. The priest says, okay, this is a word from God. This is what we're going to do. He tells everybody. They go through all the motions. They do it. And so not only do they do all that, but whenever they find out that he's getting close, they go in procession out to meet him. So 2 or 3 miles away from the city, Alexander turns the corner on the road, riding his horse, and there standing in front of him is the arrayed priesthood in all their finery, and the people of Jerusalem lining the streets in white robes. And as he rides, they stop for a minute, and everyone's just kind of got slack-jawed. Alexander rides up by himself and shakes hands with the high priest. And then his people think that he's lost his mind. So I just love this story. But whenever one of his generals rides up there and says, hey, what's going on? I thought we were going to kill all these people. That's not how Josephus wrote it. I'm kind of nutshelling some things. And he says, but before we left Macedonia, I had a vision of this man and him telling me to hurry up and march my armies because I would conquer Darius. I would conquer the Persians. And it was his God that gave me that vision. And so when I came up here, I recognized him. And so because of that, we're not going to bother these people because God had already given him a vision. So they welcomed them into the city. Alexander actually went, and according to the way the priest instructed, he gave sacrifices on the altar the way that you're supposed to, and he did all those things to thank God for the vision that he had given and the direction that he was giving to his army to conquer the Persians, because you remember one of the visions that Zechariah had earlier in our study. He said they would be punished for the damage that they had done to Israel. They went too far. Yes, he had given Israel into Judah at that time, into their hands. But the Babylonians at that time, Medes and Persians, the Babylonians at that time had gone too far. And because of that, his anger was kindled against them, and he was going to punish them. And Alexander was the instrument of that punishment. All of this prophesied, all of this told that was going to happen hundreds of years before it actually does. And so here we have it. He makes all this, and then he asks them. He brings out the book of Daniel, and the priest shows him in the book of Daniel exactly where the word was given hundreds of years prior to that of him coming in to conquer the Medes and the Persians. That it was written in their scriptures. And so Alexander, who was already full of himself, could hardly get any fuller, offered to give them anything they wanted. And he asked them what they wanted. And the high priest said, we only want to continue in the ways of our fathers, to continue to worship the way our fathers have done, our forefathers. And we ask that we don't pay tribute on the 7th year, which was the sabbatical year, which was following the law the way they should. And he gladly granted that. And then they did ask that whenever he got into Babylon and those areas, that the Jewish people there are able to continue to do the same thing. That's all that they asked of him. He gladly granted it, and he went on his way, and he conquered the Medes and the Persians. His kingdom extended clear to India, etc., so on and so forth. Bam. This powerful army that was conquering everybody just walked right by Jerusalem. Even after the high priest had insulted the leader. Never again will the oppressor pass over my people. Now we can see that as you go through history. Because after the generals split Alexander's kingdom into 4 pieces, the Seleucids that got the part where Israel was at, those people were bad. From them, you get the one that rises up that is really labeled in most scripture as the precursor or the most egregious example of who the Antichrist is going to be. Antiochus Epiphanes comes into Jerusalem playing to be their friend. Once he and his troops are inside, they wreck the place, take 10,000 people hostage to sell into slavery. They desecrate the temple, take all of the goods from the temple, place a statue of Zeus into the Holy of Holies, and sacrifice pigs on the altars. Desecrating it in every way that they can. These are the people that are come. These are the ones that are later. Never again will the oppressor pass over my people the way that he does this day. Now, what's the lesson in that for us? When his people thought there was nothing that they could do, that they were going to be conquered all over again, God brought them protection. Brothers and sisters, that's good, and I think that we need to learn that God protects. But God protects us in a little bit different way. Today, he doesn't deal with us, and we kind of talked about this in our Connect group class this morning. He doesn't deal with us on the national level the way that he did with Israel and the other nations at that time. He deals with us on a very personal level. And he protects us by our relationship with Jesus. He protects us ultimately from the spiritual and all of the attacks of the enemy and the things that are going around us every day. And he protects us from the physical things. And I think if we really knew all of the physical things that he protects us from on a day-to-day basis, things that may seem small in the big scheme of things, it's not like a conquering army's coming our way. But God watches out for you. He watches your every step. Jesus said that if a single sparrow doesn't fall without God knowing from it, if every hair on your head is counted, And no, it doesn't matter if you're counting a lot or counting little. If he knows every hair on your head, he cares so much about you that he is aware of that. He's not going to let these other things come at you if you stay in him. See, and that's where it comes down to. Israel has a tendency to wander. Brothers and sisters, if we look at our own hearts, we also have a tendency to wander. On a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis, maybe a monthly basis, whatever that is for you, we have a tendency for our allegiance to wander. But if we stay true to God, if we stay in him as our strong tower, our strength, our protector, if we stay where we need to be, right there, he has got us in his hands. And we have nothing to fear. But you know what? His hands protect us from everything on the outside, but they're not there to squeeze us in and to keep us like this. For us, his hands are open. We can choose to be there or not. And it really comes down to, what are you going to choose? Are you going to choose to leave yourself in God's hands? Or are you going to get up and walk away and do things your own way? Because if you choose to do that, then you are forsaking the protection that he has offered you. And if you forsake that, then you have got to accept the consequences of what comes your way. If you choose to forsake God, there's the falling back into sin. There's the struggles and the trials and the things that come our way, because the enemy is all the time looking for whom he may devour, right? And who does the lion go after? It goes after the gazelle that's separated from the herd, the one that's off by itself, the one that's doing its own thing. That's who it goes after. You watch the nature videos. What are all the lions trying to do in the Serengeti all the time? They're trying to separate one out. If they can get one separated, that's the one they're going after to kill. Brothers and sisters, our enemy does the exact same thing, pushing and putting pressure on us to see if he can get one of us to break. And if he can, then that person gets off by themselves, and they break fellowship, and they get away from God, and they're doing things their own way. They're susceptible to be attacked by the enemy. So, if you want that protection, you know what you have to do. You got to stay in right relationship with Jesus Christ. You got to stay reading your word. You got to stay being prayed up and being in his presence. And brothers and sisters, it includes being with other brothers and sisters. I hate to say it, but there's protection in the herd. I don't like being called a herd, do we? I don't know. Makes me feel like I need to be chewing on something. Did call us sheep, right? We are sheep. Now, 9. Rejoice greatly. There's kind of a different thought right here. Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Does that sound familiar to anybody? I've read that someplace before. Somebody give me chapter and verse. Okay. Well, I found it in Matthew. Matthew 21. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there, with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. Guess which prophet? "Say to daughter Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." The disciples went and did as Jesus instructed them, and they brought the donkey and the colt, and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and while others cut branches from the trees and spread them out on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven." The triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. "Behold, daughter Zion, your king comes to you, riding on the colt, the foal of a donkey." Why? Why did Jesus enter Jerusalem this way? Well, it fulfilled the word of the prophet, spoken 500 years before it happened. to show that he was not the conquering king. That was not the role he was playing at that time. He was playing a different role. He come in the role of the servant, the one that had come to serve others. And he served us by giving his life on the cross. He served others by shedding his blood. He served others by showing us the way that we need to be living our lives, by being that example for us. That's how he served us. And brothers and sisters, he did it well, or we wouldn't be here today. Now, are we setting that example for the generations that are yet to come? Zechariah 9:10. I will take away the chariots from Ephraim and the war horses from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be broken. He will proclaim peace to the nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. All of those things. What is interesting, I thought was very interesting, is that whenever you start looking at the historical context and everything that had gone on here, and everything that happened with Alexander, everything that happens with the Greeks and the Romans after that, whenever you study the history of all of that, never again is Jerusalem talked about as waging war with an army. If you guys could find that, please let me know. I can't think of a place where it says anything about that in the historical context. He says, I will take away the chariots from Ephraim and the war horses from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be broken. He's taking all those things away from them. They're not going to be using those things anymore. They won't need those things anymore. Does that mean there's not going to be oppressors? Yes, there's still going to be oppressors. But the people are going to be doing something different from now on. Think about what happened whenever Jesus was there. Whenever the priest came to Pilate and accused him of all the issues, and Pilate told them to go and take care of that themselves. And they're saying, but we can't. We don't have the authority. Because Rome had taken that over. Israel, Jerusalem, no longer had an army. They no longer had the authority. They had some guards, but they didn't have an army that they could call up and muster up if they needed to fight somebody. They didn't fight with the Greeks after this. They didn't have, well, I gotta take that back. The Maccabees did, but it wasn't because they had a standing army. It was because the people rose up. It wasn't because they called together the troops that had been trained. It was what they call these days grassroots, right? Your ordinary citizens rose up against the Greek oppression at that time through the instigation of the Maccabee family. Now, so his rule, he will proclaim peace to the nations. And what did Jesus do? He is the very Prince of Peace. And he has offered us through his sacrifice peace with God. And he offers that to all nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth, making his rule, his kingdom, global. Now, as for you, he says in verse 11, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I will free your prisoners from the waterless pit. I will bring them back. The waterless pit is usually the idea of a cistern, which kind of takes you back to Joseph and everything that he went through with his brothers whenever they were out and feeding the sheep, and he showed up and he had on his fancy coat and was kind of carrying on the way teenagers are wont to do. And his brothers took his coat away from him, threw him in a cistern, and sold him into slavery. Right? Kind of the same thing happened to Jeremiah. They didn't like what the prophet Jeremiah had to say, so they threw him down in a cistern. It's kind of the whole idea here that Israel is going to be put into this pit. He says, I'll get you back up out of that because of the blood of my covenant with you, and free your prisoners. Return to your fortress, you prisoners of hope. Even now I announce that I will restore twice as much to you. Now, there is a covenant that God made with Abraham that was to extend to all of his descendants. Now, God dealt with Israel as a nation for a long time. And whenever Israel would turn away from him, because they were supposed to have a special relationship, when Israel would turn away, God would punish them. All the armies, all the back and forth, all the carrying away into captivity, all the things that were happening there. But he tells them there's going to come one last time. And I'm going to pull you up out of that cistern. And I'm going to set you back up. And you're going to return to your fortress. You're going to return back to Jerusalem. You're going to return back to where you were. And I would almost say it can have a double meaning going on to who is truly the fortress of Israel? God himself. You prisoners of hope. Even now I will announce that I will restore twice as much to you. Which is, you could see that represented in Job and different areas whenever these things happen, and it was by way of teaching them something that whenever they were restored twice as much. Brothers and sisters, I really think that this is talking about today, where Israel has been restored as a nation whenever they've come back together from nothing, where they've been reconstituted, and they come back and they become a people, and the people begin to return from all over the world, the Jewish people coming back into that nation. Are you guys paying attention to what's going on over there right now? Where Iran is threatening to launch missiles at them. I was watching a thing last night where a guy was talking about that Israel thinks now that was all a feint to get every eye turned towards Iran, because while they were doing that through the West Bank and along the Gaza Strip there, they were shipping in more weapons to the terrorists and all that, Hamas and all those things. They were shipping more weapons into them through the Syria and the nations bordering them. And they caught it on satellite, and then they were able to use airstrikes and get a lot of it, but not all of it. They were able to pinpoint some of the depots that they were pulling the weapons out of, which are all Iranian weapons. So there's this whole thing that's going on. But if you'll notice, Israel keeps defending itself. And no matter how many drones they send over, or how many missiles they send over, or whatever's going on, Israel always ends up on top. And he's promised them that whenever they come together, and if they keep their eyes on him, he is going to reestablish them in such a way as they will have more than they have ever had before. And brothers and sisters, I think you and I are going to get to see that time of blessing come upon Israel. Verse 13, I will bend Judah as I bend my bow, and fill it with Ephraim. Okay? I will rouse your sons, Zion, against your sons, Greece. Now, here we were just talking about Alexander passing past them. Now we got a whole other situation. And make you like a warrior's sword. I'm going to go ahead through the rest of this. The Lord will save his people. It says in verse 14, then the Lord will appear over them. His arrow will flash like lightning. The sovereign Lord will sound the trumpet. He will march in the storms of the south, and the Lord Almighty will shield them. They will destroy and overcome with sling stones. They will drink and roar as with wine. They will be full like a bowl used for sprinkling the corners of the altar. The Lord their God will save his people on that day as a shepherd saves his flock. Now, all of this, if we're keeping this in context, and since it specifically mentions the Greeks, this brings us up to where I was talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, has anybody in here ever read the book of Maccabees? A little bit, and you have? Okay. Well, Pastor Andy, you already know what I'm getting to here. In the book of Maccabees, which is in what we would call the Apocrypha, okay, it's an extra biblical book. It was considered for inclusion in the canon, but it wasn't eventually added. There's a lot of the books that are in there that, they just really don't feel right. Maccabees works really well as history. I read it as a history book. And it tells the story of whenever the Greeks came in, part of their spreading Greek culture, they called it Hellenization of the world at that time. That was the grand vision of Alexander the Great, was to make the entire world Greek. Everyone needed to be Greek. Everyone needed to speak Greek, be Greek, eat Greek, whatever. So, in this process, they wanted them to worship Greek gods. So, Antiochus comes in, uses subterfuge to get into the city, wreaks the havoc that I've already told you about, but then he begins to demand that the priests make the sacrifice, using pigs, an unclean animal, on the altar of Jehovah. Now, they refused to do so, and they were executed. One man was a leading man in the community, and he stood up against them. Let me see, I got his, what is his name here? Mattathias, I think is how you say that. Mattathias. And he had several sons. Mattathias was a leader of the city, and they knew that as long as he was standing strong, nobody else would do it. So they tried to force him to do the sacrifices. And he refused. He wouldn't do it. And then another person finally decided that if it's going to get him off her back, I'll do it. Well, Mattathias and his sons at that time jumped forward and attacked. They killed the Jew that was about to make the sacrifices on the altar, but they also attacked the Greeks that were gathered around there. They killed the Greek general and several of his men that was around there, and in doing so, they caused an uprising. And this uprising was the people just swelling up, just coming around, trying to throw off the oppression that the Greeks had put on them because of the desecration of the temple and everything, and they pushed them back. Okay? Now, Antiochus was not there at this particular moment when this happened. He was back off in his capital city further up north. When he got wind of it, he raised up an army, over 60,000 strong, and he was going to destroy the Jews once and for all. And then according to historical texts, he decided that the Persians hadn't paid their taxes, so he was going to go get that first, and then he was going to come back and destroy the Jews. So he had another one of his generals raise up an army, nearly as large. I think it was 40,000, and then several thousand horse, so close to 50,000 in total. And he had him orders to go and destroy the Jews while he was taking care of the Persians. So they marched on Jerusalem. Mattathias fought for a year. His sons took over. Judas Maccabee is the one that is remembered the most. Led this revolt, and with 10,000 people that just picked up a weapon and began to fight back, they destroyed the Greek army. They were then able to go in and cleanse and rededicate the temple and the altar, and in the process of doing, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this or not, but it's where the Feast of Dedication comes from. As they were rededicating the temple to God after the cleansing, there is a certain way you make the oil to fill the lamps in the temple. And the lamps have to burn continually, and it takes so many days to make this oil. Well, when they got to looking, they had enough oil for one day. But it would take, 7, 8 days to make do you remember? 7? It takes 7 days to make this oil. So in the process, they had to make more oil. So they put the oil in the lamp, and they lit the lamps in the sanctuary there, and they were letting that burn. But God miraculously caused 1 day's worth of oil to last 8 days, so they were able to make more oil and then begin to replenish the lamps. Okay? That's where you get the whole idea of Hanukkah. That's where that comes from, if you've ever wondered. That's the historical background for the celebration of Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication. Okay? Jesus was even familiar with the Feast of Dedication. John 10, I believe it is. John 10, 22 and 23. Then came the festival of dedication. At Jerusalem, it was winter, and Jesus was in the temple courts walking in Solomon's colonnade. It was, as some commentators said, that Jesus celebrated it. It says that he was there in the temple during that time. But, it wasn't anything that he told them not to do. So they have this whole festival set up, and they still celebrate that today. It's right around our Christmas time, right? Everybody's familiar with that. But that's where that comes from. But that was that rededication. That was showing the faithfulness of God in the rededication of the temple and their people to stand up. Now, it was sometime after this. Now, this is extra beyond even that Rome was just beginning to grow up and be a power. And that was the only power that was going to be strong enough to counterbalance the Greeks. And so I believe it was the Maccabees themselves that went to Rome and invited Rome in to help them to be able to stand against the Greeks, which the Romans gladly did, but then they never left. Kind of see how that worked? They were invited in. They didn't have to conquer them. They were invited in. But then they set up troops there, and then they began to have to pay taxes there, and it became all this other thing. And eventually Rome took over the rest of the what was Greek holdings at that time, and it all became part of the Roman Empire. Now, that's a whole lot of history, I know. But it lines up specifically with what was said here that he would raise up his people against the sons of Greece, and they would fight back. The Lord their God, and he says specifically, the Lord their God will save his people, 10,000 against 50, will save his people on that day as a shepherd saves his flock. And he goes on to say, they will sparkle in his land like jewels in a crown. They stayed faithful to him. They continued to stand up for the Lord right up till the time that Jesus showed up. And then some of them felt like they were still standing up for the Lord until they had to come to the place of decision, where they would willfully decide whether or not they would follow Jesus and listen to what he was saying and his claims of being Messiah, or if they were going to reject him completely. And brothers and sisters, you know what happened when they rejected their king completely. Within a generation, Jerusalem and the nation existed no more. Until 1948. So nearly 2,000 years later, it was reborn. As a prisoner taken from a cistern would feel like you were reborn after being pulled up out of that hole. They were reborn as a nation. Look at verse 17. How attractive and beautiful they will be. Grain will make the young men thrive, and new wine the young women. Now, in this is a statement, and I kind of thought it was weird, and I was trying to tease with my daughter about this, about why the guys got the grain and the women got the wine. It's like they can't share or something. But all tongue in cheek aside, he's just talking about a time of blessing. That when they come together, it will be a time of blessing. And if you look and you see what happened, that land lay desolate for almost 2,000 years, with just people wandering through occasionally. It wasn't any place anybody really wanted to be or wanted to settle. It wasn't until the Jewish people came back and began to reestablish the settlements and began to work the land that the land began to green up, and it began to be someplace that people wanted to be. And it began to go back to what it was at one time as the blessings of God. Now, I will say, I think they would experience a lot more of the blessings of God if they weren't so secular in everything they do. They're ethnically Jewish, not religiously Jewish, if you know what I mean. If they were more devout, they would see a lot more happening faster for them, I think. But there's a lot of them that just, they reject the old religion part of it. They're just ethnically Jewish. And so all of this is to set up for what's to come in the future. And this preparation as Israel is now a nation again. And I've told you before that all is ready to build that third temple. They already have all of the building materials. They already have made all of the gold instruments that go inside the temple. Everything is made and just setting, waiting to be installed whenever they finally get that piece of ground that they need to put it on. And who knows when that's going to happen or how it's going to happen. I'm not going to predict that. I'm not even going to try. Now, all of this has really been a history lesson, so I hope it hasn't been too awful boring. But what does it tell us? When you're spanning hundreds and hundreds of years in the course of just a few verses here, it tells us that you can see that God's word can be counted on to always be true. So when you're reading scripture and you're reading through it and you find a promise that's for you and God speaks to your heart and this and that verse, it just jumps out at you and you want it to be yours, it can be. Because God's word is always true. That is why it is the measure that we stand by. That is why it is the rule for our lives. That is why you have to take, whenever you receive a word from the Lord, go back and make sure it lines up with what's already written. And it's not taking you way off on a tangent somewhere. Because the enemy will try to deceive. He will try to come at you in ways that you would not expect. So if you're going to serve God, you've got to be willing to know what his word says, inside and out. And brothers and sisters, there's a lot of Christians today that really don't know what the Bible says. All they know is what they've been told. Now, I try to share with you as much as I possibly can and keep it in context, give you historical background, give you everything to go with it so that you know what's there. and how it ties into other parts. But it never is going to replace your own study of God's Word. It's never going to replace you taking the time to dig in with everything that you have and find the treasure that He has for you. You can trust Him always.